Hello students, we are continuing on in our chapter 6 notes, the War for Independence, lesson 1, and we left off at the Continental Army, and I am going to preview the question and then I will read. James Madison believed winning independence was only possible with and we're going to finish the sentence. So under the Continental Army. After the Declaration of Independence, the Continental Congress served as the national government. However, the Congress lacked the power to raise money through taxes. Delegates, led by James Madison of Virginia, called for a stronger national government to bind the colonies together. They believed that winning independence was possible only under a strong national government. So we actually have our answer there. So we're going to go ahead and pause and get that answer. And here it says, it talks about James Madison right here. And then they believe that winning independence was only possible under a strong national government. And so far, they do not have a strong national government in the United States. Now, remember, we can start referring to it as the United States because even though they haven't won the war yet, they did create the Declaration of Independence and they announced that they would be called the United States of America. Number 2, why was it difficult for the Americans to get soldiers and raise money to fight the war? I will continue to read. Not every American agreed. They placed great value on liberty and personal freedom. After rejecting the rule of British Parliament, they were unwilling to transfer power to their own Continental Congress. As a result, the American Revolution was in some ways 13 separate wars, with each state fighting for its own interests. This made it hard for Congress to get soldiers and raise money. So because they don't have that strong national government, they are not together and acting as one united government yet. So it was like they were fighting 13 different wars, each with their own interest in the war. I'll pause for a moment to let you write that. And number 3, who made up a key part of Patriot forces? So we'll continue to read. Local militia made up a key part of the Patriot forces. These troops were limited. Many were farmers who needed to provide for their families and did not want to leave their fields unattended. The Patriots also needed well-trained soldiers who could fight the British throughout the colonies. To meet this need, Congress established the Continental Army, which depended on the states to recruit soldiers. So our first answer that we get from that paragraph was for number 3, who made up a key part of Patriot forces. And of course, it says that right there at the beginning. So the local militia. So now, of course, we've talked about the advantages and disadvantages of the Americans and the British so far. And one of the disadvantages was the fact that there was militia. And again, because they were unreliable, they weren't necessarily going to stay to fight the whole entire time. Now, number 4, we'll also find the answer in that paragraph. How did the Continental Congress help with the need of getting more soldiers? So the Continental Congress, here we go, the Congress established the Continental Army. And we actually have already talked about the creation of the Continental Army because we're already in the war. So a little bit of this is kind of reviewing things that we've already talked about. I'm going to continue reading out the rest of this section and then we'll move on. At first, soldiers signed up for just 1 year, but General Washington asked for longer terms. If we ever hope for success, he said, we must have men enlisted for the whole term of the war. Eventually, the Continental Congress invited soldiers to sign up for 3 years or until the war ended. Most soldiers, however, still signed up only for 1 year. The Continental Army also had a hard time finding officers qualified military commanders. Some were young men who were recruited from the ranks. The best officers had experience from previous or earlier wars. Okay, so we are going to move forward here and I have a little bit more to finish out here. So I will go ahead and do that. Men did all the fighting. Oh, nope, actually this is for the next part, okay? So number 5, we have women listed here, and actually that's gonna be a part that talk about right there at the beginning, that men did most of the fighting, but there were some exceptions. But women did contribute to the war effort in other ways besides just fighting. So I have some women listed out here that we are going to talk about what they specifically did to basically become famous from the Revolutionary War. It's important to understand that these are not the only women who helped in the Revolutionary War. They just happen to be the ones that are being highlighted in the textbook, with the exception of the last one that's not in the text that I added in here. So I will continue to read them. And we're looking for Margaret Corbin, Mary Ludwig Hayes Macaulay, Deborah Sampson, and then Lydia Dara. So men did all the fighting with a few exceptions. For example, Margaret Corbin of Pennsylvania went with her husband when he joined the Continental Army. After he died in battle, she took his place. Mary Ludwig Hayes Macaulay joined her husband in battle as well. The soldiers called her Moll of the Pitcher, or Molly Pitcher, because she carried water pitchers to the soldiers. Legend has it she also took part in combat. On February 21st, 1822, Pennsylvania recognized Molly Pitcher's service by granting her an annual payment of $40. Deborah Sampson of Massachusetts took a different route to the battlefield. She joined up as a soldier, disguising herself as a man. So we have our 3 different women here that the text refers to, and our first one is Margaret Corbin. And so Margaret Corbin took her husband's place in battle. Now, the text, it doesn't tell you what exactly that means, but she took over firing a cannon. Now, in some sources, it'll say firing a gun, but they're referring to a cannon that she is going to be taking over the firing of. You're gonna read a little bit more about Margaret Corbin in an assignment coming up, but this is the important piece that we need to know about her, that she took her husband's place in battle after he was killed and fired a cannon. So Mary Ludwig Hayes Macaulay, she has a lot of names, right? Here we go. She was referred to as Moll of the Pitcher or Molly Pitcher. So the reason why she got that name was because she carried water pitchers to the soldiers for them to drink on the battlefield and also to cool down the cannons. Now that is a really important part of that job. If they didn't cool down the cannons properly, then they would jam and then they would backfire or not fire. And obviously that would cause problems. Now, Mary made this nickname popular throughout the whole Revolutionary War. So where any woman who carried water pitchers to soldiers started getting the nickname Molly Pitcher, but she was the original Molly Pitcher. Now you are going to be asked to know these women later on, and so it's important to distinguish that Molly Pitcher is not a real person. Molly Pitcher is a nickname given to all women who are carrying water. It's Mary Macaulay who is the real woman that was given that nickname originally. So it also talks about that legend has it she also took part in combat. And because it says legend has it, we don't know that to be completely true. I would assume that it is probably also true because that's something that women just did take part of. If they were on the battlefield and they saw the need, they kind of like jumped in there. But we want to focus on Mary being the Molly Pitcher, the one who carried water to the soldiers for drinking and cooling cannons. And then we have Deborah Sampson, and Deborah Sampson joined the Continental Army as a soldier, but she had to disguise herself as a man in order to do so because women were not allowed to join the Continental Army. So she is definitely not the first woman in history to do this, and she is not the only woman during the Revolutionary War to do this, but she, again, is the one who's recognized as one of those women that did that. And we can think back to something that probably you all know about, and that is the Disney movie Mulan, right? That's exactly what Mulan did. And that we're talking about in ancient China when she did that. So that was way before the Revolutionary War that she decided to join the army as a man, because again, women were not allowed to join the army. And then our last one here is Lydia Dara, and you will also read some information about Lydia Dara on an assignment coming up as well, but I have some information that I want you to put here in your notes. So Lydia Dara was a spy. She spied on the British, and she gave that information to the Continental Army. And the way that she did it was by listening in on their conversations. She actually was serving them dinner, and they just spoke freely around her because she was a woman. And the perception of women at that time was that women weren't capable of a whole lot besides kind of tending to the children and the home and the husband. And so they, didn't think that she's smart enough to come up with something, or that she was patriotic enough, I guess, to even come up with something to steal that information and pass it on to the Continental Army. And so she was very smart about it. During those dinners, she took notes. And then when she smuggled those notes to the Continental Army, she still was really smart about the way that she did it to make sure that she wasn't caught. She sewed those notes into the lining of her dress. So in between the layers in the dress. So even if they absurdly made her lift up her dress so they could see if she was hiding anything underneath it, they would find nothing because it was actually inside the dress. She would have had to rip the dress to get that information out in order to give it to the Continental Army. So I'm going to give you a moment here to finish that information. Okay, so our next one is going to be slightly tricky because I can't show you that part of the textbook unless I completely enlarge it on the screen, which I am going to do in a moment, I believe. So our number 6 is we're looking to write the question. And you may be able to come up with this question without actually finding the information in the text. But the answer is no. But their contributions were critical to the war effort, and a few did fight in the war disguised as men. So we should have a clue right off there. Who are we talking about? A few did fight in the war disguised as men. Who would have to be disguised as a man? A woman, right? So our first part of the answer is no, but their contributions were critical to the war effort. So we're talking about something that the women did during the war. Now, to actually come up with a correct question, I'm going to enlarge my screen here now. What you would need to be looking at is this photo right here that would be in the textbook. Well, that is in the textbook. And then underneath it says, during the Revolutionary War, women could not officially join the army. A few managed to fight in disguise. Many more served as cooks, nurses, or even spies. View the slide show illustrating women's roles. So we can actually do that too. Let's see what it's going to show us here. I'm going to go. Here? Okay. So this is actually the famous photograph of Margaret Corbin. So her husband is lying dead there, and then she took over firing the cannon. And let's see what else we have here. Oh, okay. This is Lydia Dara. So they do have a little bit about her in the text, but they didn't write it in the paragraph part. So she is passing on that information, or she's getting information here, it looks like, because this is a British soldier. So she's taking information from, it says the English officer questioning Miss Dara. So they were talking to her about what it was that she was doing. And then this one, who is this one supposed to be? This one is Deborah Sampson, and that she disguised herself to fight in the war. Okay, so we're going to go back to our notes. So it says that women were not allowed to join the army. And so that's what our question is going to be centered around right here. And could women officially join the army in 1776? No, but they did have important contributions to the war effort. And some of them did end up fighting, right? They weren't officially part of the army, but they did still some fight in the war, not only disguised as men either, right? We had some that just took over for soldiers who were wounded or killed. Now that part also did give us the next answer as well. So I'm not going to refer back to it because I, again, need to enlarge the entire screen. So in what ways do women contribute to the war effort? So we're going to list out everything, and we're going to take some of those things from up here as well. So we had women who were nurses, they were cooks, they were spies, and we've got a spy up here, right? We list the spy here, but we also had some who fought in the war as soldiers, but they weren't officially in the army, and carrying water to soldiers. So I'm going to give you a moment to both finish writing that question and also writing the answer for number 7 before we move forward. So I'm going to leave that there again for a little longer for you to finish typing that out. And we are moving on to our next heading, which is early campaigns. And our question is, why did the British send 32,000 troops to New York in 1776? So I'll begin reading before I switch the page. Relatively few soldiers fought in the war's early battles. At Bunker Hill, for example, about 2,200 British soldiers fought, 1,200 Americans. The British had not yet won a clear victory. They realized they were going to need more troops. During the summer of 1776, Britain sent 32,000 troops across the Atlantic to New York. The British commander, General William Howe, hoped the sheer size of his army would convince the Patriots to give up. He was soon disappointed. So I'm going to go ahead and change the page here. And again, our question was, why did they send 32,000 troops to New York in 1776? So here it is. They sent 32,000 troops, and their General Howe, the reason why they did that was hoping the sheer size of his army would convince the Patriots to give up. He wanted this war to end quickly. And again, a lot of the British came into this war thinking that it was going to end quickly, right? Because they had so many advantages up against the many disadvantages of the Americans. And then we have Patriot defeat on Long Island, and we're looking for, how did Nathan Hale show bravery? Only 20,000 soldiers made up the Patriot force under George Washington, yet the Americans were determined to fight. The two sides clashed in the battle on Long Island in late August 1776. The British badly defeated the outnumbered Continental Army. One patriot, Nathan Hale, showed his bravery at Long Island. Hale disguised himself as a Dutch school teacher and went to spy on the British troops. The British caught Hale and hanged him as punishment. According to legend, Hale went to his death saying, "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country." The Patriots fought hard on Long Island, but could not overcome the larger and better equipped British Army. A British officer wrote that many Patriot soldiers killed on Long Island had not been wearing shoes, socks, or jackets. They are also in great want of blankets, he said, predicting that the rebels would suffer during the winter. After the defeat, Washington retreated from New York, which became a Loyalist stronghold. The British chased the Continental Army across New Jersey into Pennsylvania. Satisfied that Washington was beaten, the British let him go. So Nathan Hale showed bravery in a couple of ways. This is our paragraph right here. Patriot Nathan Hale showed his bravery. He went to spy on the British troops, and he was caught, unfortunately, and he was hanged as punishment. So he was put to death. But he's not the only spy in our history either, right? We also just talked about a female, Lydia Dara, who also was a spy, who, again, showed bravery. But what makes him special was his dying words. And that was, "I only regret that I have but one life to lose for my country." So he was saying that he would do it over and over again, even if he knew he was going to get caught. Once again, because he knows that this was the right thing to do, to fight against Great Britain, to win independence, to become a separate nation. So number 2, why were the Patriots defeated on Long Island, New York? And so we're looking at this paragraph right here. Patriots fought on Long Island, but they could not overcome the larger and better equipped British Army. They were outnumbered. They lacked supplies. They were outmaneuvered, meaning that Great Britain was better planned. Remember, they have a great leader of George Washington for the Americans, right? But he's really one guy, and the British have a lot more experienced commanding officers. And so it's still going to take time for that army to build up and to be strong and to bring other soldiers up the ranks who are as good as George Washington or close to as good as George Washington. And so, again, coming down to the Americans not having a united government and no treasury, no money. So they're lacking all these supplies. They talked about how a lot of them had no socks or shoes or jackets. They needed blankets. Otherwise, they're not going to survive enough to continue to fight in the war. So a low point for the Patriots. And why was the Patriots' cause near collapse in the winter of 1776? I'm thinking maybe you can guess this. We're leading up to it from that last question. And so Washington and his forces had managed to escape the British. As winter approached, however, the Patriots' cause was near collapse. The Continental Army had fewer than 5,000 soldiers. And remember, they really only had about 20,000 earlier. But that's a lot to be down, right? 1/4, 1/4 of the army is only left. So many had completed their terms. And also remember that most of them signed up for only 1 year, so they were done. And others had run away. Washington wrote his brother that if new soldiers were not found soon, I think the game is pretty near up. Yet he remained hopeful that the fight for freedom would succeed. Washington begged the Continental Congress for more troops. He suggested allowing free African Americans to enlist, but many Americans opposed this idea. Early in the war, the Southern colonies had persuaded Congress not to take this step. Many white people in the South worried about giving guns and training African Americans. They feared the possibility of revolt among the enslaved population. So, why was the Patriots' cause near collapse? Well, we have fewer than 5,000 soldiers, right? And they continue to lack supplies. And that I put as not specifically there in the text, but we just referred to it in that question previously, that they, saw those soldiers without the socks and the shoes, and they needed more supplies. So the next question, number 2, said, what did George Washington do to get more troops? And here he begs the Continental Congress for more troops. And so he says that they should be allowed to enlist African Americans in the war. So number 2, George Washington asked the Continental Congress to allow free African Americans to enlist in the Army. So we did have some Americans who objected to this idea of allowing African Americans to fight in the war. And so who objected to this and why? We have the Southern colonies who do not want this to happen. And hopefully you realize that it's the Southern colonies that don't want this to happen because they are the primary slaveholders, right? So even though we're talking about free African Americans, they're still worried about giving African Americans weapons and training them to fight. Now, I feel like it's a little bit absurd that they have this fear of revolt against the Southern states specifically, but about just to white people in general, if they decided to fight in the war. They are choosing to fight in the war because they think that it's a good idea. So to think that they are simply going to just turn on any white man that they see is kind of ridiculous, in my mind, at least. I don't know how they think that that would even happen. Not to mention, the African Americans are still going to be greatly outnumbered by the white soldiers who also all have weapons. You're only giving them one weapon and they have to be loaded every single time. Now, also remember that previously, African Americans weren't allowed to use weapons. They weren't taught how to use weapons because of fear of revolt on plantations, right? So even once they're given these weapons, it's going to take them a little bit of time to really get good at using them. So it's kind of crazy. I've said that now how many times? I think it's a crazy thought that that's what they think is going to happen if they let African Americans join the Army. So I think we're going to go ahead and pause here for today, and we'll talk about African Americans in battle next time.